The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the quiet streets of downtown Los Angeles. Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal walked side by side, their casual attire hiding the legendary skill and discipline that lay beneath. To anyone else, they were just two middle-aged men taking a stroll, perhaps out of place in the gritty neighborhood. Unbeknownst to them, a small gang had been loitering nearby, their eyes sharp, scanning for easy targets. Fueled by prejudice and bravado, they spotted Chuck and Steven and quickly misjudged them. One of the gang members whispered, "Those guys look soft. Let's see how tough they really are." The leader stepped forward, swaggering, trying to appear larger than life. "Hey, you two, what are you doing here? Think you belong around here?" His tone was aggressive, tinged with arrogance. The other gang members laughed, circling them slowly, trying to intimidate the two men. Chuck and Steven glanced at each other, exchanging a subtle nod. Calm, composed. They said nothing, giving nothing away. Their eyes betrayed a quiet confidence that unsettled the gang more than words ever could. The tension was thick, electric. A few pedestrians slowed their pace, sensing trouble, but didn't yet realize the danger they were witnessing. The gang, blind to the reality before them, continued their taunts, mocking appearances, testing boundaries. One gang member stepped a little too close, shoving Chuck lightly. "You think you can just walk through here like you own the place?" he sneered. Chuck's hand twitched, a reflex born from decades of training, but he restrained it. His calm expression didn't change. Steven's eyes scanned the gang, reading their movements like an open book, waiting for a critical moment. The gang had no idea what they had just provoked. To them, these men seemed ordinary, vulnerable, maybe even scared. But hidden behind that calm exterior was a storm of discipline, skill, and deadly experience. And then came the moment that would shock everyone standing nearby. They had no idea who they were messing with. The hook was set. The audience was on edge, eager to see what would happen next as tension began to rise and danger loomed. The gang's laughter echoed down the alleyway as Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal continued walking, unhurried, like men completely unaware of the danger behind them. But they were far from unaware. Every step, every glance, every movement was calculated, precise. The gang, fueled by bravado and prejudice, saw only what they wanted to see. Two easy targets, walking alone. The leader, a stocky man with a jagged scar along his jaw, stepped directly into their path. "Where do you think you're going?" he demanded, his voice rough and aggressive. His cronies formed a semicircle, cutting off escape routes, circling them slowly, like predators sizing up prey. Chuck glanced at Steven, a subtle nod passing between them. No words were needed. Their calmness was unnerving. The gang expected fear, hesitation, perhaps even excuses. What they got was silence, and that silence was louder than any threat. "You think you're better than us?" One of the younger gang members spat, stepping closer. "Just 'cause you're older? You look soft, man. Soft and weak." He reached out, shoving Chuck lightly. The casual shove might have been enough to provoke someone else, but Chuck didn't flinch. Not a muscle moved in his face. Steven, meanwhile, leaned slightly forward, eyes scanning every movement, every potential threat, reading them like an open book. The gang's leader leaned closer, smirking, trying to assert dominance. "You should show some respect around here, old man. Or maybe I should teach you a lesson." His hand hovered near his belt, fingers twitching toward a weapon. The tension in the air was suffocating. Pedestrians slowed down, sensing the rising conflict. Some reached for their phones, not fully understanding what they were witnessing. "Should we call the cops?" one whispered to another, fear evident in their voice. But no one dared interfere. They didn't yet realize the magnitude of what was about to unfold. Chuck finally spoke, his voice calm, steady, but carrying unmistakable authority. "We don't want trouble," he said. "Just step aside and you won't get any." There was no anger in his tone, no ego. Just a quiet confidence that seemed to grow heavier in the air with every passing second. The gang laughed nervously. "Don't tell us what to do," the leader barked. "We're not scared of you." Another thug stepped closer, cracking his knuckles. "Let's see how tough you really are." Steven Seagal, the man known for his martial arts precision, didn't say a word. He shifted slightly, weight distributed evenly, ready to respond to any sudden move. His presence alone added to the tension. The gang didn't know that behind his calm, Collected exterior laid decades of experience in elite military operations and deadly combat. A bystander, watching from across the street, began recording on their phone, sensing the impending danger. "This doesn't look good," they whispered to themselves. And they were right. The gang had no idea that they were dealing with two of the most skilled combatants alive. Every move they made, every attempt at intimidation, was being silently analyzed by men who had faced far worse than street thugs. The leader grew impatient, stepping forward aggressively. "Move aside, old man, or else," he shouted. He had no idea that his "or else" might be the last words he ever commanded. The gang members laughed again, a little less confidently this time, but still trying to maintain their bravado. Chuck and Stephen didn't move. They didn't panic. They didn't even raise their voices. Their calmness was maddening to the gang. It was as if they were daring them to act, testing their judgment, letting them make the first mistake. Where are you watching this story from? Which country or city? Drop it below. Let's see how far Chuck and Stephen's message of calm strength reaches. The tension grew. Every second stretched, filled with unspoken threats and invisible power. The gang tried intimidation, but the more they pushed, the more unnerving the two men became. Their stillness, their confidence, made the gang question themselves without even realizing it. Then came the subtle signals. Chuck shifted his weight slightly, a minor adjustment, barely noticeable. Stephen's eyes locked on one of the more aggressive gang members, tracking every twitch, every micro-expression. In that moment, the gang still thought they were in control, but the balance had begun to shift. Pedestrians stopped, watching intently, phones recording. The air was thick with tension, fear, and anticipation. Everyone present knew something big was about to happen. The gang's leader, unaware of the storm he was provoking, raised his hand, pointing aggressively. "I warned you," he shouted. And that's when it happened. A small, almost imperceptible movement, a warning, a test, a signal. Chuck and Stephen were ready. The calm before the storm was over. The stage was set for the ultimate confrontation. The air was thick with anticipation. Pedestrians stopped in their tracks, phones held high, capturing every second of what was quickly becoming a high-stakes confrontation. The gang had grown impatient. Their initial intimidation tactics had failed. Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal remained calm, almost unnervingly so. The gang, fueled by prejudice and overconfidence, misinterpreted that calm as weakness. The leader, his scarred face twisting in frustration, stepped forward. "I said move aside," he barked, his hand reaching toward a belt knife. His crew, emboldened by his aggression, closed in, encircling the two men tighter. "Or else," one of the younger members whispered, cracking his knuckles nervously. Chuck shifted slightly, a subtle movement that went unnoticed by the gang, but was enough to communicate readiness to Stephen. They didn't panic, they didn't flinch. Every nerve in their bodies was alert, every muscle ready to react. Their eyes scanned the gang, measuring each threat, calculating risk with the precision of seasoned warriors. The crowd around them began murmuring, whispering among themselves. Some were terrified, others awestruck. Nobody knew what these two seemingly ordinary men were capable of, but the tension was undeniable. The gang, on the other hand, was growing bolder. One of them pushed Chuck lightly again, testing the waters, expecting resistance or fear. Instead, Chuck stepped back slightly, controlled, measured, almost inviting a mistake. Stephen, standing slightly behind him, noticed a particularly aggressive gang member edge forward, ready to swing. His hand twitched, but he didn't act. Not yet. He let the gang make the first miscalculation. The silence of the two men was louder than any threat the gang could conjure. The gang leader laughed, trying to mask his frustration. "You think your calmness scares us? You're nothing." His words rang hollow in the tense air. Chuck's lips barely moved as he said, "Calmness is not weakness. It's preparation." The words barely registered to the gang, but the crowd took notice. Some spectators whispered, "Who are these guys? They're different." Cameras clicked, phones recorded, every microsecond of the standoff captured for posterity. Then came the real escalation. The gang began shouting, threatening physical harm. "We'll teach you a lesson, old men. You're in our territory." A thug brandished a metal pipe, spinning it in his hand. Another swung a chain loosely, testing the courage of their supposed prey. Fear rippled through the crowd. But Chuck and Steven's unwavering calm created an invisible barrier of control. The tension had reached a breaking point. Every spectator knew, one wrong move, and this confrontation could explode. Chuck and Steven could have fought, could have ended it instantly, but they didn't. They stood tall, allowing the gang's aggression to escalate, letting them make the first tactical error. If you were in Chuck or Steven's place, would you stay calm like them, or fight back immediately? Comment your choice below. The gang misread the signal. Mistaking patience for fear, they pressed harder. One young thug swung at Chuck, a sloppy punch that barely connected with air. In a fluid motion, Chuck shifted his weight, redirecting the energy harmlessly, leaving the attacker unbalanced but unharmed. The crowd gasped. They were witnessing a masterclass in restraint, skill, and precision. Steven mirrored the movement on the other side, intercepting another thug's attempt to strike with a spinning block so smooth it looked like a dance. Yet, there was no malice in their movements. No unnecessary force. Just control, discipline, and experience. The gang's confidence wavered. Some of them froze, unsure how to react to men who didn't respond with fear, anger, or chaos. Others attempted to regroup, but their attempts were sloppy, desperate, and increasingly ineffective. The crowd sensed the shift in energy. The aggressors were no longer in control. Chuck and Steven exchanged subtle glances. A small nod, a barely perceptible movement, and the gang was unknowingly walking into a trap of their own overconfidence. The tension, already palpable, was about to snap into something far more dramatic. Who do you think is more dangerous in this standoff? Chuck Norris or Steven Seagal? Type your answer in the comments below. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the alley, it became clear this was no ordinary fight. It was a test of patience, perception, and skill. The gang had underestimated their opponents, and that mistake would soon cost them dearly. The stage was set for the first strike, a subtle, nearly invisible warning that Chuck and Steven were more than mere mortals. And as the gang pressed forward, their arrogance blinding them, the calm before the storm was about to end. Every spectator, every hidden camera, every phone recording captured one undeniable truth. These two men were not ordinary. They were legends. And soon, the gang would learn the hard way just what legends are capable of. The alley was alive with tension, every heartbeat echoing like a drum. The gang, misreading calm for weakness, had grown reckless. Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal stood side by side, unshaken, their bodies relaxed yet ready, their eyes scanning every movement, every subtle shift in weight. The leader, puffed with misplaced confidence, stepped forward. "I warned you. Time to show some respect." His voice was rough, filled with bravado, but beneath it was the first tremor of uncertainty. The others followed, closing in, swinging fists, twirling chains, and threatening with metal pipes. Chuck's hand twitched almost imperceptibly. In a flash, he shifted his weight, stepping slightly to the side, and with one fluid motion, the first gang member lunged forward and stumbled. Not from a hard strike, but from Chuck's perfectly timed redirection of force, a gentle push that left him off balance, sprawling harmlessly against the wall. The crowd gasped. What they saw looked effortless, a simple nudge that felt like a display of supernatural skill. Meanwhile, Steven mirrored the action on the other side. A thug swung a chain at him, but Steven's hand intercepted it midair. With a subtle twist, the weapon was sent harmlessly clattering to the ground. The attacker froze, wide-eyed, realizing he had been completely outmaneuvered without a single forceful blow landing. The gang was now visibly shaken. Confidence cracked. What just happened?" muttered one of the younger members. The leader clenched his fists, but even he hesitated. Chuck and Steven were unlike anyone he had faced. There was no rage, no shouting, just calm precision. Chuck spoke, low and steady. "Violence isn't about anger. It's about control. You've lost both." The words hung in the air, striking harder than any punch could. The gang members looked around at each other, unsure whether to attack again or retreat. Steven stepped forward, voice quiet but commanding. "It's over. Step back. You've already made mistakes you don't understand." One subtle motion from him, a shift in weight, sent a gang member tripping over his own foot. Another demonstration of mastery. The crowd couldn't believe what they were seeing. These men were untouchable, precise, controlled, lethal if needed, but restraining themselves intentionally. A bystander's phone recorded everything. The expressions of shock, awe, and fear were priceless. People whispered, "Are they military? Secret agents? Legends?" Nobody could have guessed the truth. Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal were both elite military commandos, trained to handle situations far worse than a small gang. The leader, now panicked, barked orders, but his men were already unsure. Every attempt to attack was neutralized almost before it began. Each redirection, each subtle counter, displayed decades of skill without a single malicious blow. The gang had underestimated them completely, and the consequences of that mistake were becoming painfully obvious. Chuck and Steven exchanged subtle nods, a silent understanding passing between them. No words were needed. Every movement communicated strategy, restraint, and readiness. The gang's arrogance was crumbling, replaced by fear and confusion. Then, the turning point came. The gang leader lunged at Steven with a reckless punch, aiming to regain control. In one smooth motion, Steven sidestepped, guiding the leader forward in a gentle arc, causing him to stumble and collide softly with the alley wall. The crowd gasped again, realizing these were no ordinary men. Every action calculated, every strike avoided intentionally, every response precise. Chuck, seeing another thug attempt to swing a pipe, moved with lethal elegance, disarming him effortlessly. The gang members now stood frozen, fear overtaking their bravado. Each movement from Chuck and Steven was a lesson. Skill without malice, strength without cruelty, power restrained by discipline. The whispers grew louder. People in the crowd began recognizing them. "Wait, isn't that Steven Seagal?" one murmured. "And that's Chuck Norris." Another gasped, pointing their phone. The gang still had no idea who they were facing, but the realization of their mistake was already sinking in. The tension shifted. The gang, once confident, was now on the defensive. The crowd, once terrified, was now silently cheering, captivated by the calm mastery of these two legends. Chuck and Steven, however, didn't celebrate. They remained calm, composed, teaching the gang the most important lesson of all: underestimating a man based on appearance or age is a grave mistake. Were you shocked by their calm and control? Type "respect" in the comments if you think Chuck and Steven handled this perfectly. As the sun dipped lower, casting long, dramatic shadows down the alley, the stage was set for the full reveal. The gang would soon discover not just skill, but identity, and the consequences of their arrogance would be absolute. The calm before the storm had passed. Now, the legend was about to be fully revealed. The alley was silent, but for the nervous breathing of the gang. Every member was frozen in a mixture of fear, awe, and disbelief. The calmness of Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal, the effortless neutralization of every attack, and the precise, controlled movements had shattered every shred of the gang's arrogance. Yet, the gang had no idea who they were really confronting, not until the moment that would change everything. Chuck Norris stepped slightly forward, voice low but commanding, cutting through the tension like a knife. "This isn't about age. It's not about who you think we are. It's about respect." His words were deliberate, measured, and carried a weight that made even the gang leader pause mid-sentence. Steven Seagal's gaze swept over them, calm but piercing. "You've made many mistakes tonight," he said quietly. "Mistakes that could have cost you everything. And you still don't understand who you're dealing with." Every word was precise, deliberate, and as he spoke, the gang began to sense something far larger than mere martial arts skill. The first whispers started to spread through the crowd. "Wait, that's Steven Seagal, isn't it?" someone murmured, phone cameras shaking as they zoomed in. "And that's Chuck Norris." The recognition rippled through the bystanders. Shock turned into awe. The gang's leader faltered, his bravado crumbling as the reality of their mistake hit him. You're Chuck Norris," one thug stammered, voice trembling. "And you're Steven Seagal." The words barely formed as fear overtook their bravado. The gang's earlier aggression evaporated instantly, replaced by a dawning horror. They had targeted two legends, unaware not just of their fame, but of the elite military and combat experience that both men carried. Chuck's calm voice broke the silence again. "We didn't want this fight," he said, eyes scanning the terrified gang members. "All we wanted was respect, something you failed to offer." You judged us by our appearance. You assumed weakness where there was strength. And now, he let the pause hang, letting the weight of his words settle over the alley like a shadow. Stephen stepped forward, moving with measured authority. This is your final warning, he said. There are consequences for arrogance and ignorance. Remember this moment, and never underestimate anyone again. His presence alone carried a weight that silenced every remaining whisper, every racing heartbeat in the alley. The gang's leader stumbled back, trying to muster some control. We didn't know, he stammered. We weren't trying to, but the words failed him. The crowd now realized that Chuck and Stephen had not only the skill to dominate the situation, but also the restraint to avoid unnecessary violence. Their aura was one of discipline, moral authority, and quiet power. Bystanders, who had initially feared for the duo, now began cheering. Phones captured every angle. The crowd, once passive witnesses, now became part of a viral moment in the making. People were witnessing not just combat prowess, but a masterclass in humility, restraint, and the consequences of underestimating others. Chuck glanced at Stephen, subtle nods exchanged. Time to end this, Chuck said quietly. The gang, completely demoralized, made no move to resist. Every aggressive stance, every shouted threat, every display of bravado was now replaced by panic and submission. In one final, controlled sequence, Chuck and Stephen neutralized the last attempt at aggression. A thug swinging a chain was guided harmlessly to the ground. Another lunging punch was intercepted with perfect redirection. The entire confrontation had ended without a single serious injury, a testament to their skill and discipline. The crowd erupted in applause. Cameras clicked, phones recorded, and social media notifications began to explode. The legend of Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal had just grown immeasurably. Chuck looked at the leader, voice calm but firm. Remember this. Respect isn't given based on fear, money, or appearance. It's earned by actions and humility. Stephen added, strength is meaningless without control. Wisdom is meaningless without restraint. Learn from this, and don't make the same mistake twice. If you think the gang got the lesson they deserved, type respect in the comments below. Who would you want as your ultimate protector, Chuck or Stephen? The sun was setting, casting dramatic long shadows across the alley. The gang was humiliated, defeated, and forever aware of the mistake they had made. The bystanders, however, were inspired, witnessing a story of calm mastery, restraint, and the consequences of arrogance. Chuck and Stephen turned, walking away as if nothing had happened. To anyone watching, they were just two men leaving an alley. But to those who had witnessed the confrontation, they were legends, unstoppable, disciplined, and morally untouchable. The stage was now perfectly set for the aftermath, the viral moment that would sweep social media, the lessons learned by the gang, and the lasting legacy of two of the greatest martial artists and military-trained commandos alive. The legend had been revealed. Respect had been earned. And the world would never forget it. The alley had grown quiet, the chaos of moments ago replaced by an almost reverent stillness. The gang, once loud and threatening, now huddled together like children caught misbehaving, eyes wide with disbelief and fear. Their bravado, so apparent just minutes before, had evaporated entirely. Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal stood at the center of the alley, calm and composed, their bodies relaxed but radiating quiet authority. The bystanders, once terrified, now cheered softly, phones raised to capture every second. The two legends hadn't needed to shout, hadn't needed to strike with lethal force. They had neutralized the threat with precision, discipline, and restraint, a display that left everyone present, including the gang, in awe. The gang's leader sank to his knees, shaking his head. We didn't know. We had no idea who you were, he muttered. His crew mirrored his panic, too humiliated to speak. They had been undone not by sheer strength, but by skill, composure, and strategic mastery. Their ignorance and arrogance had been exposed to everyone. Chuck looked at them, voice calm but firm. Respect isn't earned through threats. It isn't something you can demand. It's something you must show. Every word resonated, carrying decades of wisdom, experience, and moral authority. The gang shivered, fully aware of the lesson they'd learned too late. Stephen added, his tone equally composed, strength without control is meaningless. Power without discipline is dangerous. You've had a glimpse tonight of what that really means. A subtle glance at the gang made them flinch, not from fear of retaliation, but from understanding the moral weight behind his words. The crowd, now fully engaged, whispered and cheered simultaneously. People shared videos in real time, sending clips across social media, knowing they had witnessed something extraordinary. Comments and messages began to flood in, with hashtags like #RespectLegends, #ChuckandSeagal, and #DisciplineOverViolence trending almost instantly. One bystander spoke into their camera, whispering in awe, "I thought this was just some street fight. But these men, they're not human. They're legends." Another recorded the gang, now cowering in shame, murmuring, "This is unbelievable. I can't believe we just watched this happen." Chuck and Steven didn't gloat. They didn't celebrate the humiliation of the gang. Their calm, deliberate demeanor turned the attention to the lesson rather than themselves. Chuck's eyes scanned the crowd as he spoke softly. Humility is stronger than arrogance. Strength without honor is weakness. Steven nodded, adding, "And never judge anyone based on appearances. You never know the training, the discipline, or the life they've lived. That judgment can cost you dearly." The words hit hard, especially for the gang, who had learned that lesson in the harshest way possible. The leader tried to stand, but Chuck motioned subtly, and he froze, understanding he wasn't allowed to rise without acknowledgement of his mistake. One by one, the gang members lowered their heads, a sign of submission, not to brute force, but to moral authority. If you think the gang finally learned the lesson, type respect in the comments. Could you stay calm like Chuck and Steven in this situation? Word of the incident spread faster than anyone could imagine. Social media exploded. Clips from multiple angles went viral within minutes. Millions watched, commented, and shared, everyone captivated by the story of restraint, skill, and moral dominance. The message was clear. True strength lies not in aggression, but in discipline, composure, and respect. The gang, now in the custody of arriving authorities, had become a cautionary tale. Their faces, still pale with humiliation, were captured on video, juxtaposed against the calm confidence of Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal. The contrast could not have been starker. Chuck turned to the crowd one last time, voice calm and deliberate. "Remember this day. Remember what it means to respect others, not because of fear, not because of fame, but because it is the right thing to do." Steven added a final thought. "This is about humanity. Treat people with dignity. That's the true measure of a person." The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, dramatic shadows across the alley. Chuck and Steven walked away together, unhurried, leaving behind an indelible mark on everyone who had witnessed the confrontation. Bystanders whispered, applauded, and shared the moment, fully aware that they had just seen a masterclass in control, strength, and moral authority. If you were watching this live, would you have had the courage to stand like Chuck and Steven? Comment your answer and the city you're watching from. As the legend of the incident spread online, millions praised Chuck and Steven not only for their combat skills, but also for their humility and moral compass. The gang had learned a lesson in respect the hard way, but the world had learned a lesson in true strength, patience, and integrity. The humbling of the arrogant gang was complete, and the story of restraint, honor, and discipline was now immortalized, viral, inspiring, and unforgettable. By the time Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal walked away from the alley, the city had already begun buzzing with news of the confrontation. Pedestrians, who had witnessed the encounter firsthand, were sharing videos on social media, their phones capturing every precise movement, every calculated counter, and every silent moment of control. Within minutes, the story had begun to go viral. Online platforms exploded. Clips from multiple angles circulated across Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Hashtags like #RespectLegends, #ChuckandSeagal, and #DisciplineOverViolence trended worldwide. Millions of viewers commented, shared, and expressed awe at the discipline and restraint shown by the two legends. People weren't just fascinated by their combat skill, they were inspired by the moral lesson embedded in every action. The gang, once brash and arrogant, now faced the full weight of their misjudgment. Police had arrived, detaining each member as bystanders recorded the handover. Public opinion quickly turned against them. What had begun as street harassment had become a cautionary tale. Local news outlets ran the story, highlighting not just the gang's humiliation, but also the calm, commanding presence of Chuck and Steven. The narrative spread globally, a story of respect, discipline, and the dangers of prejudice. Chuck and Steven, however, didn't bask in glory. They didn't celebrate the gang's defeat or the viral fame. Their walkaway was quiet, dignified, and unhurried. To the casual observer, they were just two men leaving an alley. But to anyone paying attention, they were the embodiment of discipline, moral authority, and humility. Chuck spoke quietly to Steven as they exited the scene. People often underestimate others. They judge by appearance, by age, by skin color. Today, they learned that true strength comes from within and from restraint. Steven nodded, adjusting his jacket. "It's not enough to have power," he said. "Control is the true measure of a warrior. And respect isn't given. It's earned through actions and character." The crowd continued to cheer, recording, and sharing. Some approached to thank them. Others asked questions about martial arts, discipline, and self-control. Chuck and Steven took a moment to answer politely, spreading the lesson of calmness and humility. Each smile, each measured response reinforced the message: strength without honor is meaningless. Across the globe, the story gained traction. Martial arts enthusiasts dissected the videos, analyzing every movement. Social media users debated tactics, but more importantly, they discussed the moral of the story. People commented from countries spanning every continent, sharing how the story inspired them to act with courage, discipline, and respect in their own lives. The gang's leaders faced consequences beyond embarrassment. Local authorities reported that they were suspended from community events and enrolled in mandatory rehabilitation programs focusing on anger management and anti-discrimination education. The humiliation had been public, the lesson clear: prejudice and aggression have consequences, especially when underestimated. Chuck and Steven's reflection resonated everywhere. News outlets quoted them. Chuck, "Never judge a person by appearance. Judge them by their heart." Steven, "Strength is nothing without discipline. Power is nothing without control." For those who witnessed the event firsthand, and for the millions who watched online, the story became more than a viral moment. It became a lesson in humanity, humility, and courage. Chuck and Steven had demonstrated that real strength lies in restraint, in moral authority, and in the quiet power of self-control. If you believe no one should be judged by appearance and that true strength is restraint, type respect in the comments below and subscribe for more inspiring stories like this. As the sun set over the city skyline, Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal disappeared into the distance, leaving behind a legend that would be remembered for years. A story of courage, discipline, and moral power had spread across the globe, inspiring millions. The gang had been humbled, the bystanders enlightened, and the world reminded once again that true heroes are defined not by their victories, but by their character. The confrontation in the alley became a story told and retold, a lesson in humility and respect, immortalized in the digital age, the ultimate testament to the quiet, disciplined power of two legendary warriors.